All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Florida. I'm your host. How you guys doing this morning? That's good. Today we are headed back to you guessed it, Florida. And in 2017, in September, a very nice woman named Jennifer Fulford went to work in Winter Park, which is a very upscale neighborhood in Orlando. And she was a nanny and a caretaker and a house manager for this upscale rich family. She was good at her job and well liked and good with the kid and good at managing the house and appreciated and just a really, a woman that had her ducks in a row, good at her job, well liked, had it going on. And on this day in September 2017, she's at the house, probably trying to get ahead while the kid's not there, trying to get some stuff done. And it's the middle of the day. It's hot already. It's September in Florida. And she hears the doorbell ring. And if you're expecting people, if you're expecting friends to come over or you know a neighbor's going to stop by, the doorbell is a nice sound. But if you're not expecting anybody, and it's a strange time, the doorbell has a haunting quality to it. It's like, who is that? Are you expecting anybody? Who is that? And, well, let's stop there and go back 25 years, where Scott Nelson started his career in the prison system in America. And Scott Nelson had a pretty rough childhood. A lot of people do. Not the roughest that you'll hear, but he did have a pretty rough childhood. His dad was abusive and left, and he was stuck taking care of his schizophrenic mom. I'm not totally sure that Scott Nelson doesn't have some sort of mental issue himself. They say he does have head injuries, and later on a prison doctor would say that he has an IQ of 83, which is, I think, on the just below average. And like I said, tough childhood, but a lot of people do. I would say someone watching this video right now has had a worse childhood and is fighting and doing the best they can to make the best of their life after their horrible childhood. But Scott Nelson was in and out of prisons his whole life, and for robberies, and he would get out and he would be homeless and end up going back in. And I don't totally know what a lot of his charges are. If someone does, maybe list them. But I know the last one that he did a 14-year stretch for was armed bank robbery. He went into a bank, not very smart. He went into a bank and tried to rob it with a fake bomb. That's the best, just going in like, I swear I got a bomb under this coat. Give me the money. So he gets 14 years for that one. And so he is definitely institutionalized. And you can see this by, I think people, especially like him, that spend so long in prison, they become so manipulative because really it's out of survival. He's been in prison for so long, and the only way that he can the only card that he has, or that he can get what he wants or change, a guard's mind about something, is just being very violently manipulative. And so he has this poor me, manipulative, everybody is against me, yet I am putting out awful energy. I think he's a very difficult guy in prison. They said somewhere in the trial that he made all the races in prison mad except the Mexicans. The Mexicans were fine with him. But the blacks and the Muslims and I think the whites and everybody were just like, get this dude out. The Mexicans was like, he's cool. But he was not well liked in prison by the people, by the guards. He's got these like small little brown teeth and he loves playing the victim. He is a world-class victim player. And so he does a long time in prison, all over the country. Everything that you can imagine that happens in prison that's awful happens to him. And at some point, he needs surgery for his digestion. He needs one of those, something where he needs a colonoscopy? I'm not saying it right, but one of those bags where, actually my poor mother had one a few years ago, where something's wrong with your digestion, and so they like get surgery where they break your intestine and then put it out so you actually poop out of your stomach into a small bag. And then usually they let whatever is happening in there heal, or they fix it a time later, and then they go do another surgery and they take the bag and they reconnect your intestine, and hopefully you're good to go again. And so he has something wrong with his digestion that requires that surgery. So they give him the surgery that requires him to have this bag that he poops in. It's a pretty tough situation to be in. I do feel for him for that. And so he has this bag, and when you're part of this prison system, you get your medical for free, right? You can't just let someone die in there. And so he gets this, and then he's promised that he'll get the other surgery to reconnect the intestine and to get rid of the bag. Well, his release date is nearing. It's getting closer, and in his opinion, it's starting to seem like they're purposely stalling out the surgery so they'll let him out without having to pay for to put it back. And I don't know if we'll ever know who was really in the right, but I do tend to agree that you can't just release this guy with this situation. I feel like you gotta bite the bullet as society and finish up that surgery before letting him out. That's just my opinion, though. So anyway, he's let out. And he's on parole, and he is required to, so he's out, no money, he's 55, so no family or friends. I don't know if in that part of the country or just left, or if he's just lost everybody because he's such a difficult dude, or I don't know what it is. But so he gets out, no family, no friends, and he's required to get a job and housing. And his federal parole officer is a guy named Julio Dominguez. And which at first I was like, oh, that's good, Julio Dominguez. He, Mexicans seem to like this guy. And so he is looking for a job and looking for housing, and it's probably not easy for a felon with a poop bag to be like, hey, would you like to hire me? I can start today. I'm 55. But he ends up getting a job at this guy who has a painting company. and works there for 6 weeks and is also eventually allowed to live in the painting company that this guy runs in a garage. And one of the levels, there's a little suite. So they even allow him to live in the suite. And part of his probation, part of the stipulations are you have to tell your employer and your landlord that you were in prison, that you're a felon, and what you're in prison for. And I don't know the exact wording on that, but what Scott Nelson did is he told the owner of the paint company that he was a felon and that he went down for armed bank robbery. And that's it. Or that's all he mentioned. And so he works there for 6 weeks, gets 2 paychecks, and at least according to him, his parole officer, Julio Dominguez, shows up one day. And Scott Nelson is sitting there painting. He described this time as very peaceful. And Julio, his parole officer, shows up and talks to the guy that is employing him and his landlord. And according to Scott Nelson, said something like, "Did he really tell you what he was in for? I mean, just the bank. Oh my God, he didn't tell you all that? Oh my, you'd be crazy to have this guy living here." And at least according to Scott, he just unnecessarily, and it's probably somewhere in between. Again, every story that Scott tells, he's just the brutal victim, did nothing wrong. Everybody is just ruining my life. But maybe this Julio guy did not do it at the right timing, or I don't know. So whatever it is, this parole guy comes up, talks to the owner, and I guess says the right things, because the next day, Scott loses that job. And just sort of breaks from, it just is filled with rage. He goes back to being homeless, and I think being homeless again, feeling like I got this job and I got housing, I did what I was supposed to do, and then in his opinion, it's ruined by the parole. He's got a poop bag that he's just walking around being homeless with. I mean, that is a nightmare. That's the one thing I do feel for the guy until he does what he does. Up until this point, I do feel for him. But here's where what he thinks makes perfect sense and everyone in the world should just feel bad for him. Here's where he just... So he has that just rage and F the world mentality that is not good. And so he's wandering around this rich neighborhoods of Orlando, and he starts to get this hatred that these are the richest, this is one of the richest neighborhoods in the world, and I'm just sitting here homeless. No one wants to help me. Everyone pretends like they always want to help people, and they don't. And my parole officer lost my job, and I got this poop bag, and it's just... And so his first plan is he's going to shoot Julio Dominguez. I don't know how, but he has a 9mm and a couple boxes of ammo. And according to him, he was on the same side of town as Julio and had this gun. And he believes in God, and just the sheer will of God changed his mind, and he didn't shoot his parole officer. And if he would have, it wouldn't have been justified, but it would have at least made sense in the way he describes it later on is, okay, this guy lost my job. I was at the end of my completely pitiful rope. I lost it, and I shot this guy. Or I went up and I punched him in the nose. But he decides not to kill this guy. And he bums around for another month. And he goes to, and this is where I stop he had those 2 paychecks, and the big way that he plays the victim is, I was hungry. I was starving to death in the richest neighborhood in the world. I was just, I was starving. And then it's like, all right, so you had these 2 paychecks. What'd you go buy? If you were hungry, what'd you go buy? Did you go buy food? Well, he goes to Walmart and he buys zip ties. Can't eat zip ties. He buys duct tape. Also, not edible, Scott. You can't eat the duct tape. If you're hungry, buy an apple. You can't. He also buys a giant Walmart knife. Again, maybe to cut the apple that you're thinking to buy. Or so again, he's this poor me. I was starving, you guys. Like, what was I supposed to do? This is the only thing I can do. So he buys this zip ties, duct tape, and a knife. And now he's just this completely institutionalized, low IQ, head injury, possibly mentally ill man is walking the streets of Winter Park, Florida, with a knife, with duct tape, and with zip ties at the complete end, feeling sorry for himself, feeling violent, planning a home invasion to try to get money I guess in his head he thought, well, my parole officer is going to ruin any job or anything that I do set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a home invasion. I'm going to get a bunch of money. I'm going to stick it to these rich sons of bitches that aren't helping me. I'm going to take my money and get out of town. And so he's trying to pick a target for this home invasion. And he's wandering around. He's living on the streets of Winter Park, and he sees Jennifer Fulford, the nanny. And this is the day before. And he sees her, sees the house. He had known of the house because a house that he had painted, they had said that these people have a lot of money. It's a nice house. And so he looks at Jennifer and says, okay, that's how I can get in. And he decides on that house. And the next day, carrying his duct tape and zip ties and a big old Walmart knife, he walks up to the house and he rings the doorbell. And Jennifer comes and answers the door. And he said he didn't really have to force his way in too much, but anyway, it's extremely sad, you can probably imagine, but he forces his way in, terrifies her with the knife, tries to find money, some moron with no plan, can't find money, is panicking, she's seen his face. So he bounds her up, wraps her in a comforter, brings her out to her car. They get in her car, they go to an ATM. So he's on an ATM, like the camera, pulling out $300. It's like, Scott, pulls out $300 of this nice woman's money, being on camera, so it's just not going to last. So he pulls out $300 measly with her terrified in the trunk, and then gets back into the car and drives to the Disney property. The happiest place on earth, or whatever. And drives her to the Disney property, pulls her out of the car, duct tapes her entire head, which, again, it's like, dude, you're really going to try to play the victim after you duct tape this nice lady's head? Okay. Everybody was feeling a little bad for you when you were homeless with a poop bag. We really were. We felt for you. But now, no one cares. You can't. That's not a logistical jump from I'm sad that I'm homeless, I robbed a bank and now I'm in a real tough spot. That's a tough jump to duct taping some nice woman's head and face. It's just, you're not going to feel any society, and this is, I think, not to this level, but I think this is probably was his MO his whole life. Is maybe he had a point that didn't have the best situation, and maybe he was going to get a little sympathy, but the way he handled it was just like, all right, fuck this guy. I don't care about this guy. I hope this, you get what you put out, and this guy constantly just put out horrific energy and results, and that's what he gets back. And so poor Jennifer, he duct tapes her whole head. She's bound with zip ties, and he stabs her right there in the Disney property or Disney area. I don't know, it's huge. And then he drives her car back to civilization, parks it, gets in, takes a train to Jacksonville, I think, and just kind of sits there. Doesn't really try to. He wants to get caught, maybe to get the surgery or just to go back to jail so he's not homeless, or, who knows, but he just sits there. And they arrest him, and then they bring him in for an interrogation, which I would love to see. But so they bring him in for an interrogation, and we hear a lot about it when he takes the stand. But this interrogation, so he's being interrogated, and according to him, he wants to do a little quid pro quo, like, okay, you guys want all this information, you want a confession, you help me, I'll help you. And then he became very annoyed with the feeling that the detectives were pretending to say, yeah, you tell us this, we'll give you that. And then it's like, real, of course, Scott, you really think they're going to be like, all right, you tell us this, and then I'm going to help you in the end, right? When we're done with this, I'm going to do everything that you need. Okay. And so according to him, once he figured out that the detectives were bullshitting him, he started bullshitting back. And so he starts confessing to this outrageous, adding all of these details. He said one of the women detectives, every time he would say a crazy detail, she would go, oh, and get all excited. So then he said that it became his goal to just keep kind of getting a rise out of her. He didn't care. Because this is a guy that wants to go back to prison. Also a guy that has done 25 years in prison, in the system. And so he knows how the whole thing works. So if he has an advantage during this process, is he's not naive to how detectives work. He's not naive how the system works. He knows how to manipulate it. He knows how to stall it. He knows how to play the victim. I mean, he's got everything. He's got everything down. And so he does this crazy interrogation, has nothing to lose, confesses to a bunch of stuff, confesses to the whole thing, and is arrested. And so he goes on trial, and this whole thing ended like 2 weeks ago. So he goes on trial, and the big part of the trial is he wants to take the stand. And his goal for taking the stand is his sole goal for taking the stand is he wants to tell everybody that the reason Jennifer was killed is because of Julio Dominguez. He thinks it's justice. And so the judge, for like 10 minutes, is like, are you sure you want to take the stand? Because if you take the stand and you're unlikable, or basically ask him questions for 10 minutes. Like, are you sure? You don't have to take the stand. If you do, and you come off as horrible, because that's your personality, if you come off as horrible, the jury can decide off that. So are you sure you want to take the stand? And he says yes. And he takes the stand. And people, it is one of the most outrageous courtroom. He's on the stand for a couple hours, then he ends up taking it again, and the 3 hours, it's half him trying to be the victim and half of an interrogation, because the prosecution is like, well, if he's up here, we might as well, grill him with some of these questions. And so but anyway, we're going to go through him taking the stand. It's absolutely insane, but we'll start that tomorrow. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But yeah, I'll post the link to the 2-hour one if you want to watch it tonight. It is worth it. It is totally nuts. And then yeah, we will slowly go through it. But I hope you guys are having a good week. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Why? Starving why? Shamita.